Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Farmer. I'm your chair for this special 1 hour long webinar entitled Why Modern Methods of Construction Are Essential for Recovery Post-COVID. The webinar has been convened and is hosted by Building Better, which is an innovative and collaborative grouping of housing associations that have all come together and decided to do things differently in the future, and has also been kindly sponsored by Top Hat, who are one of a new wave of advanced manufacturing businesses establishing themselves in the UK to serve the residential market. We'll hear more about Building Better and Top Hat in due course. Today's discussion is going to cover various perspectives on modern methods of construction, MMC, from across the industry and from government, and hopefully shine light on why this really could be an unprecedented time in terms of catalysing the industry to seize the opportunity of changing and modernising. One of the things that's been talked about for a long time but has remained elusive, and how we can all look at taking that opportunity to change the development process, the construction process, improve the quality of what we build, the homes we build, and which many housing associations are owning and operating. I'm delighted to be joined today by an absolutely first-rate set of speakers, including the Housing Minister. The Minister will speak first and then take questions as he is under time pressure, so has to leave partway through. We'll then hear from Homes England, the National Housing Federation, the MMC sector itself through Top Hat, and Building Better as well in terms of representation from the project board. We are going to be holding a Q&A at the end, so after all four of the other speakers have done their piece, we'll run a Q&A session, so please ask questions through the chat function. I'll look to collate a selection of questions at the end for the speakers. I'll introduce each of the speakers in turn. Before we get going fully, I just wanted to give some very brief additional context before handing over to the Minister as to why, as I've said, we should really take this opportunity, seize the opportunity for changing construction. And I'd summarise this through three key points. I think firstly, what's been clear over the last few weeks is that we need to build a more resilient construction delivery model, one that is perhaps less reliant on excessive site labour intensity, one that's much more structured and collaborative in terms of the supply chains that it uses, using different procurement models that are a lot more about collaboration and pre-planning, and also to think more about demand side collaboration as well, and perhaps routes to standardization of what we're building and how we're building it. Secondly, a need to improve productivity. Really, if we're going to drive economic recovery in the post-COVID world, then we need to create a different way of doing things with new future-proof jobs, offsetting perhaps some declines in more traditional industries we may well experience. And lastly, using this opportunity to level up the economy. You know, what we clearly have with offsite manufacturing is an ability to rebalance economic growth across the UK, looking at a renaissance in some of our former industrial heartlands in the Midlands and in the North, and in bringing SMEs and large manufacturers into the equation in equal measure to be part of that recovery. And if we can capture all of those points, then as highlighted in the report that Cast have recently published and which will be shared through the chat function and on the follow-up to this webinar, then hopefully we'll be able to look at improving the quality of what we build, decarbonising the built environment, looking at driving scale efficiencies and the economies of that, and speeding up delivery, which is the critical thing. In essence, this is all about how industry and government can work together to change home building. And I'll use that as my segue perhaps to introduce our first speaker, which is the Housing Minister, the Right Honourable Chris Pincher MP. Minister, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for that introduction. Thank you also to Top Hat and for BB for organising and facilitating this webinar. I'm really pleased to join you to discuss why modern methods of construction are essential for our recovery post-COVID, as we use a different sort of MMC to have our discussion, a modern method of communication. I have to say, this rather two-dimensional webinar world and the logging into it more than anything else has proved the biggest challenge for me. I'm sure that some of the challenges that we'll have with MMC as a construction method will be equally challenging, but no less rewarding. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining this webinar. I'm really conscious that over the last 8 or 10 weeks, businesses, and this sector is no exception, have had a really, really tough time. We are still in the midst of a crisis of massive proportions, global proportions, and the decisions, the tough decisions that our government, as well as many others around the world, had to take 2.5 months ago, I know have been tough. So I'm grateful for everyone's patience and perseverance. I'm also conscious that given that this particular sector operates differently from the traditional building sector, the MMC sector has been affected in a particularly unique way. And so what I want to say at the outset is that as we work to jumpstart our economy, I am very keen that we don't lose sight of the unique opportunities that MMC provide and the challenges that you as the entrepreneurs in that space face. So we'll keep working as we restart the economy with our local partners, local councils. I spend a lot of time with local resilience forums to manage the effect of coronavirus on the housing sector. And therefore, thank you for those of you that have returned to work, and particularly thank you to those of you that have worked through the crisis. I know that social distancing as a concept has proved challenging, but there are important steps in our road to recovery. And so I'd encourage everybody, and I'd be interested also to hear how it's going, to make sure that the measures as we open up our sector again are in place to give you and your workforce confidence. Now, as I said, I think that I recognise, ministers recognise the effect that this epidemic has had on your businesses. I hope that the furlough scheme, that the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme have been mechanisms that have helped you. And I hope that perhaps I can learn some more about how those schemes have gone for you and what further support we may usefully be able to provide in the future. That's not to say, of course, I can wave a magic wand and simply magic up support. We have to get buy-in from the Treasury. And as I always say to people who speak to me, not all good ideas start in the Treasury, but lots of good ideas can end in the Treasury if the Treasury doesn't like them. So we have to be clearly persuaders of the Treasury of the importance of supporting one sector over another and explaining the particular challenges that it has. But the initial signs in terms of the recovery, I think, are promising. Certainly since we made the announcements now last month to allow the secondary market to move, and with the HBF and the CLC announced the Safe Working Charter, which Bayes also played a leading role in, we have seen a real interest in the demand side of the equation. And now on traditional sites, something like 86% of sites have, I think, started to go back to work. But of course, there are still challenges, and I'd be interested to hear what they are from the participants on this webinar, because it remains our objective to build out at a very significant rate as we move through this decade. We want to build 300,000 homes every year by the middle of the decade. Every 100,000 homes that are built is worth about 1% to our GDP. And as you all know, across the housing sector, from brickies to carpet fitters to people who make the signs to nail up outside people's homes when they're moving. 2.3 million people are employed, and I want to see more people employed in the MMC elements of the sector, because as we build out those new homes, which we will and we must, I want to see MMC play a bigger role in that, because with, what is it, 60% reduction in on-site working numbers, in something like an 80% reduction in fewer defects, we can build homes more greenly, more cheaply, and with a better quality using modern methods of construction. And that is going to play a significant role, as I think Mark alluded to in his opening remarks, to our carbon emission targets and to the crucial role that we will play in COP26 when it gets going next year as we move toward net zero carbon emissions. I'm convinced that MMC can play a large part in that, and I certainly want to look hard at how MMC can deliver for those parts of the markets which have not yet been well served by it. So, for example, properties to buy and places to rent, from social housing to private homes. I'm keen that we look into those sectors as well. We've been an early backer of this particular sector. The $2.5 billion which is invested in the Affordable Homes Programme has really been directed at SMEs, and as we recover from this particular emergency, I want to make sure that we keep SMEs at the front and at the centre of our recovery focus. And that's why, as the new AHP kicks in, and we're discussing with the Treasury the fine details now of the tenures to be agreed, that modern methods of construction play a significant role in the future. I'm confident that it can thrive. I want to play a part in helping you as leaders in the sector to thrive. And as we rebuild our economy from the challenges of COVID-19, as we get people back to work, build new skills, recruit new people into our industries and work in different ways, and of course a lot more people are going to be working from home, then working to roll out more modern methods of construction in the housing space and beyond it, I think is going to be crucial to our economic well-being for the future. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you, or rather speak to my screen this morning. And I look very much forward to hearing what you've got to say and keeping in touch with you for future close collaboration. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for that. So we've had some questions in. So let me just take a selection. So you mentioned there, Minister, about the new AHP and the discussions with Treasury going forward. So one of the questions here from the housing association sector is all about that need to deliver more security and confidence in relation to longer term development programs, particularly in relation to how they can use MMC. So just a question really as to when that clarity might be coming in terms of a new grant settlement program.
Well, thank you for that. As soon as possible. And I know that sounds a rather glib and trite answer, but we're working very closely with the Treasury to just finalise the details. I'm sure everyone will appreciate that we've had a few distractions to cope with over the last couple of weeks. We wanted to get this done earlier when the Treasury announced it at the budget, but I look forward to, in a matter of weeks rather than months, being able to address more directly those questions from your housing association members.
Okay, very good. Another question here related to the planning process. So obviously pre-COVID, we had a planning white paper in in progress. Question here about planning consents and backdating of planning consents to get things going post-lockdown. But I think probably a broader question in terms of, is there an opportunity from government to make a closer link between innovation in how we build, including MMC, and the planning process, perhaps?
Well, we've certainly made some emergency changes to planning, which were announced last month, and we've, for example, issued a written ministerial statement on temporary flexes to construction hours. So I think we're very conscious of the challenge that COVID-19 has presented to planning, the need to do things more virtually, for example, to deal with the fact that we can't easily hold meetings or put documents in certain places that ordinarily they would have been placed for inspection. I'm very conscious of the issue that has been raised about permissions becoming extinct because of the pause that we've had to undertake. And I'm also conscious that as we emerge from the emergency and the lockdown, there'll be opportunities that we can look to further to try to streamline and make more transparent the planning process. So I hear what those people asking those questions have to say. I'm working on some innovative solutions and announcements, and they should watch this space.
Very good. Perhaps time for one more question, Minister, if possible. Someone has asked here whether the future of incentives and support to the sector might be made more conditional upon quality, carbon, and implicitly the link to MMC. So, you know, the conditionality of maybe Help to Buy or the grant program going forward. Is there a way in which you can more explicitly perhaps incentivize modern methods and different ways of production?
Well, that also links, I think, to the planning question that came earlier. And I think we want to look at all these opportunities with Homes England to identify how we're supporting the SME community, because be in no doubt, I want to make sure that whether it's MMC or the traditional house building community, those who are SMEs get through this crisis as smoothly as we can possibly help them so to do. What I do not want to see is a big contraction in the supply side because we need to have SMEs that can offer a variety of tenure, variety of building types that increase the absorption rates into the market. And as I said, MMC has a role to play. So whether it's discussing with Homes England what we can do to support SMEs, whether it's looking at the planning system, and we announced, for example, last month that we'll be making changes to sales payments and deferral of sales payments, which will help cash flow for SMEs. What we can further do with the planning system to make it easier for businesses which are offering greener builds or more attractive and better design builds, what we can do to help with the process there are all areas that I want to look at. So I'm very keen to hear those ideas in more detail because I'm very receptive to them.
Thank you, Minister. I think we may be out of time in terms of you having to move on, but we've had some really interesting questions. I just haven't had time to ask you. So if you don't mind, I'll share those with your private office separately, and you can get a sense of what people are asking in terms of what the burning questions are, and hopefully we can continue that debate. So thank you.
Next time you come into the office, we can have a proper chat about them. So you can take me through them all, and I will.
Indeed, I'll take you up on that, Minister. So thank you once again for joining us. Yeah, I think everyone will be keen as industry to work closely with government in this coming period to make sure we have a good recovery. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the webinar, and now I will try to lead it without crashing it. So have a good afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so next up, and probably a good segue from the Minister's closing remarks there, I'd like to introduce John Paul Diamond, who's Director of Investment at Homes England, who perhaps will be able to just shine a bit more of a light on how Homes England are looking at MMC effectively as the government's sort of major instrument of delivering policy on the ground, particularly when it comes to land release and grant programs, etc. So, John, can you talk a bit through what Homes England's perspective is on MMC, please?
Yes, thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everybody. So, in terms of MMC and the agency, it's not something that it's something we've been working on for quite a long time. And if you go back to our strategic plan, which was our 5-year plan, which we set in 2018, we identified 6 key themes that we really wanted to focus on to support the sector, which included unlocking land, unlocking investment, creating better market resilience. But one of those key 6 themes was increasing productivity. And so MMC we've recognised the importance of this part of the sector for a long time now. So I thought it'd be really helpful if I just spent a couple of minutes just taking people through exactly what we have been doing and the journey that we're on. Obviously, as the Minister's just referenced, the COVID crisis, that's arguably put a pause in some of our thinking, but equally it's helping us to shape the thinking now so that the sector can come out in as good a position as it possibly can when we're at least slightly better through the crisis. So we've been using, or we've been adopting MMC as an important part of construction productivity for a while now. And really, we will look to support developers where MMC, an approach from MMC, really allows homes to be built kind of in a threefold test: more efficiently, that allows greater diversity in terms of the construction sector, and that, really importantly, doesn't erode quality or add to timescales. And I'd actually turn that to say improves quality and shortens timescales. Now, we really do this through the 2 main elements of the agency's business, the land and the investment sides of the business. So through the land business, we've been mandating the use of MMC as part of our DPP land sales, whereby a proportion of those sites must be delivered through using agreed MMC specifications. And all the time, we're constantly looking and iterating how the next site, what's the appropriateness of MMC to a specific site. So we look to flex that on a case-by-case basis. We're not coming up with a standard measure for any particular segment. We're also mandating MMC as part of the schemes funded through the LAAC, which is a local authority accelerated construction scheme, where we are requiring the local authorities to deliver MMC outcomes on their land, where they are in receipt of LAAC funds. And then thirdly, we've actually established a pilot initiative on our own sites, where last year we've taken 8 sites to the market. It's on a national basis, and we've as an agency recognised that we'll potentially get less financial return for those sites, but what we're demanding of those sites is a more ambitious MMC outcome. And we're going to really use that. And we recognise this is a long process in terms of getting outputs, getting research, but we really want to use those sites to embed and foster a much better research initiative, really allow our joint understanding of MMC technologies to be better understood and better shared with the market. And in terms of progress, 2017-18, MMC featured in about 2,000 homes that the agency was involved in the delivery of. Move on a year and that number was up to 5,500 homes, and looking at last year, we're up to about 15,000 homes. So it is a building picture where we are really driving MMC techniques in terms of those homes where we have a direct role in terms of delivery. One of the highest profile schemes we currently have is at Northstowe in Cambridgeshire, which is about a 10,000 home urban extension. It's where the agency is acting as master developer. And last year we selected Urban Splash to deliver 406 units through an MMC type solution for phase 2A of that site. So that's now through the planning process, and they'll be coming onto site at an appropriate juncture. On the other side of the business, through the investment side, there's been a couple of fairly large deals where we've really backed the sector. There's the very well publicised Sekisui House and Urban Splash joint venture that we not only have an equity participation in, but we've also provided debt funding to that JV, and also we recently announced our funding proposals to ILCA, and there's another number of other conversations that we're having. So we are putting money into the contractors as well to support the sector. And I think really what I'd end on is echoing many of the minister's comments. You know, we're very much in the middle of a COVID crisis. We're moving through it into a post-COVID environment, and we're going to continue to work very closely with the market, with partners, but importantly acting as that crux between the market and government to make sure that we continue to deliver the best range of interventions to support the market and importantly this sector, because we recognise that MMC is critical. And you know, I can't see the questions, but I'm sure there will be questions about new plans and new policies. And I think what I'd ask is people just respect that some of those conversations are ongoing, but MMC is very much at the fore of a number of those.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mark.
So moving on now to a perspective from the National Housing Federation and the housing association sector. Delighted to introduce Will Jeffritz, who's the head of policy at the National Housing Federation. So Will, over to you.
Great, thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. Just for those on the call who aren't already familiar with us, the National Housing Federation is the umbrella body for housing associations. We represent about 800 housing associations who house about 6 million people across the country, and probably most importantly for this conversation, built about a quarter of all new homes last year. And we've been very lucky to work very closely with Building Better on how to unlock the potential of MMC for the social housing sector. We're proud that Building Better grew out of the NHF project actually a year or two ago. And I sort of picking up really where the Minister and Homes England have already gone to some extent. So alongside supporting our members to deal with the immediate impact of the current crisis, one of our major priorities at the moment is certainly this big piece of work around the contribution that housing associations can make to economic and social recovery. It's really clear that affordable house building will be crucial to that, because economically obviously supports jobs and supply chains across the country, and the Minister talks about the importance of that, and also socially. So our research before this crisis showed we need to build 145,000 affordable homes each year to meet housing need, and now, you know, more than ever, those homes, it's become clear how important it is that those homes are high quality, safe, spacious, low carbon, and accessible. To do that, therefore, we're going to need dramatic improvements in technology and productivity, and MMC is clearly at the centre of that. So the question really, I think, is what do we need to unlock its potential? And I'd like to pick up on one particular issue, which is the link between long-term investment in social housing and the development of MMC, partly because we've recently worked with Cast on a report which is not yet launched, but kind of looks at this in a bit more detail. And what it shows is that the sort of historic lack of long-term certainty around investment in residential construction has led to, has meant low investment in skills and technology, which means low productivity overall. So on the flip side of that, one of the keys to unlocking that investment in MMC and in the skills and technology needed is long-term stable investment. This won't necessarily come from the kind of for sale housing market on its own, because by its nature that's cyclical. But we argue it could come from affordable house building, because with the right government support, affordable house building is unaffected by the market and is traditionally quite counter-cyclical, in fact. So with 10 years certainty, housing associations and manufacturers could invest confidently for the long term. So that's in the technology, of course, but also the skills, the people needed to actually deliver it. And that's why we think the future for MMC and for affordable house building are kind of inextricably linked in a way. We think that, that a long-term ambition for affordable house building is a really important part of the recovery from this crisis, partly, as I said, partly for the economic impact and partly for the social impact and the need to meet housing need, and that long-term plan and that long-term investment is also crucial to unlocking MMC and the kind of potential of MMC to deliver those high quality zero carbon homes. So we're really excited about working with Building Better and about, I guess, the potential for MMC to play a really big part in affordable house building over the next few years. And I'll leave it there, but looking forward to questions at the end.
Thank you, Will. Thank you for that. So next up, we have Neil Tickle, who's Director of Partnerships and New Business Development at Top Hat, who are sponsors for this webinar. Neil, I'll leave it for you now to talk a bit about what Top Hat are doing and the sort of the new world of MMC as it's currently emerging. Over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mark, for the introduction, and great to see the Minister join us this morning as well. So as Mark said, I'm Neil Tickle. I'm Director of Partnerships and Business Development at Top Hat. I'm still kind of classed as a new boy, 3 months into my role, but I have 20 years experience in property, housing, starting off in construction and almost going full circle back into the MMC world. The last 13 years, I was Development Director and Group Land and New Business Director at a large housing association. So I understand absolutely your perspective and concerns and issues because I've lived them as well, delivering thousands of new build homes across London, the South East and the Midlands as well. So who are Top Hat? Well, we're a timber modular housing provider. The business is 4 years old now, and really we're just entering into an exciting growth phase. So we have a real emphasis on high quality and technical solution to our homes, and we've got a state-of-the-art factory in Derby that, working at capacity, can deliver more than 800 homes a year. That growth phase will invariably end up in us having a second factory and building and fulfilling that as well. We work with housing associations, we work with councils, we work with contractors, developers, investment funds, management funds, all of which want something slightly different to each other. And what I feel like is we have now a solution to work with all of those different bodies. I'll focus today on how things will work best with housing associations and councils, given the good number of people on the call. I'm going to share my screen with you now, endeavour to do that, and share some pictures that you can take a look at whilst we're talking. It's just a bit of a slideshow. I won't talk to them, but what you'll see is a selection of pictures and photos that show the production of the homes. There we go. Hopefully you can see that okay. So yeah, it's factory-based production line photographs as well as some pictures of finished homes, so you can get a good idea of the different selections and options that a client can choose when buying homes from Top Hat. So naturally, standardisation is a key benefit of MMC, and it allows those homes to be built much quicker. But please don't mistake standardisation for lack of choice, because that certainly isn't the case. We absolutely are proud to offer an unrivaled set of options for clients. If I give you some examples, once you've chosen the homes that you might pick for a site, or you might be led that way by planners, and you have 2 beds, 3 beds, 4 beds, whatever they might be, then there's a raft of options to configure the homes that you want to see on site. Now you might start with a roof shape. You might want side to side pitch, front to back. You may want a flat roof. You might want to pick different materials for that roof. Onto windows, the size of the windows, the location within that facade, all the things that you can choose. Onto the internal layout. If you have a PRS home or something that's market driven, then you might choose to have 2 equally sized bedrooms and en suites. For a more traditional family composition, you might not want that, and you might go for something slightly different. So all of these are choices that you can make through that process. And then moving on really to specification and what your maintenance teams want to see selected in terms of materials in those homes. As the Minister said earlier, the most interesting and probably the selection that we're spoken about and I'm spoken to the most is around the zero carbon option. We offer a building regulation compliant energy efficiency with our homes. You can choose 35% improvement on those building regs, or you can choose the full zero carbon option for the homes that we deliver. And actually it's much simpler for us to deliver that on site because of course we're building homes precision engineered to very small tolerances in a factory rather than on site, as you'll appreciate. So once the specification on the homes is agreed and we're in contract, you can have those homes on site in under 4 months. That's the reality of it. Naturally, that depends on factory slots, but we'd fix them as we go. And really, how quickly you have them once we start delivering homes is down to the saturation rates you've got, or how quickly you need to let these properties. But obviously, it's often market driven. The homes arrive to 90% completed on site, and we complete then what we call our zip up process, finishing the final bits and putting the modules together. That's done very quickly, meaning residents can move in and get the keys to the entirely finished home just a matter of weeks later. So how can you start your MMC journey? How can you work with a provider like Top Hat and start to see the benefits of MMC that you're hearing about today? Well, I think initially there's an education piece. It's partly for elected members or executives or boards of your respective organisations to understand a little more about off-site manufacture. And I mean, we can help you with that piece by providing you with information. The reality is our timber module homes are the same. No, they're better than the timber homes that have been built in this country for many, many years. They're just built somewhere different and brought to site. That's the reality. And a lot of people get tied up in perception and concerns that they don't fully understand. As well as the clients, as well as that, we need the clients to understand what we need as manufacturers and providers in order to deliver our homes onto site. And that's really early involvement. If I take you through an example, a live example, if you have a site that has an outline planning permission or a very good, strong chance of getting a planning permission, you can come to us with some fairly basic information, a block plan or planning capacity study and a schedule of accommodation. We'll then work that through and check it against suitability for our archetypes. 99 times out of 100, that's absolutely fine. And often it can lead to efficiencies too in what we provide. Now that might be more homes on site or a different configuration, more people housed, whatever that might be. From there on, our design teams and architects will work with your project architects in order to get the reserved matters application done and completed. And then we can be put together with a civil engineer provider, or we can be put together with or we can provide that service ourselves and deliver everything to you in a turnkey solution. So really, to close, as I'm running out of time, I think there's 5 takeaways, really 5 key benefits that I'm sure you know, but are worth reiterating. MMC, the time taken to deliver is far shorter, saving construction costs and getting people moved in to their homes much sooner, and the rent and the sales income as well comes to you much quicker. Secondly, due to our quality assurance system, the homes are built better, meaning better customer service and far fewer defects, and the Minister gave some telling and compelling stats earlier on that. Thirdly, the homes are more efficient, easier and cheaper to heat and cool for residents, pushing down fuel poverty and reducing bills there. Certainty of delivery and around availability of trade to complete those homes is a key one at this point in time. And let's see what the post-COVID environment looks like. But as you know, we have our supply chains and resources in place to deliver. And lastly, of course, all homes are chargeable, mortgageable, all the things you would expect from a home built in any traditional way. We provide a long-term BLP building warranty, as you would get from any home, and we also have a minimum 75-year life accreditation for the property from BOPAS, build off-site. So really, it just leads me to say that at this unprecedented time, it's very clear to me that MMC is a key part of the solution to get us back towards driving those 300,000 homes per year, as the Minister talked about earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Very comprehensive. And finally, we have Alison Bennett. Alison is Director of Development at Raven Housing Trust, and she's also a project board member for Building Better, who have organised this webinar. So, Alison, over to you to explain a bit more perhaps about Building Better and the link to MMC.
Thanks, Mark. That's great. Yes, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ali. So, yeah, I'm here with my Building Better board member hat on. Many of you will have seen a cartoon in The Economist in April, and it depicted a personification of the world squaring up against the climate change in the boxing ring. But looming over both of them was the bigger, beefier, more threatening contender of climate change. And I can't kind of get that cartoon out of my mind. I think that is because we're dealing with the immediate issues around coronavirus, but also trying to factor in the long-term strategic challenges we were facing prior to this. So climate change was at the fore of the national conversation. The government had committed us to net zero carbon by 2050. Housing association boards and exec teams were considering what that meant for our asset management and development strategies. For us here at Raven, we committed to not putting a spade in the ground on any new build homes that either weren't net zero carbon or had a clear strategy for meeting net zero carbon. And that's just because we didn't want to build the cost into the business plan. But also for me as a development director, it would kind of break my heart if I was building homes now that in 10, 15 years time, we're going to need significant investment and kind of redesign because of something that we knew about when we started to build them. So I don't purport to having a crystal ball or being able to predict what the new normal will look like and when we'll arrive at it. But I do believe that MMC is going to be a key element in how we respond. When we think about the sector's response to coronavirus, collaboration was key. So you think about all the different departments that have been collaborating and that chief execs forum that we've been hearing about. That collaboration has meant that we've been able to speak honestly and openly about the risks we're facing, how each other's responding, which has meant as a sector we've responded incredibly well, but also each individual organisation has responded incredibly well. And for me, that's key to how we look at MMC and how we build coming out of this. Neil and others have talked about the really key drivers for why we're thinking about MMC. There's the speed, the efficiency, the ability actually to socially distance, however long that carries on for. That's much easier in a controlled factory environment. But also that quality assurance, which has been a real challenge for us in the construction sector. And then finally, just something around BIM, we will be looking at bringing that forward, and MMC is a really good way to incorporate that at the earliest possible stages. So for us at Raven, in terms of collaboration, we got involved with Building Better. And what Building Better is it's a group of housing associations that recognise by working together, we are a much more attractive prospect to the manufacturing sector. We can aggregate our pipelines, enabling us to procure at scale. So instead of me doing a 10-unit pilot site, which I'm sure every time we talk to manufacturers about pilot sites, they all wince. Instead of me doing a 10-unit site, someone down the road doing a 20-unit site, we actually, let's talk together, let's go out and say we've got 500, we've got 1,000 homes, and suddenly we're a much more interesting prospect. So that also enables manufacturers to have greater certainty in terms of how they invest in their manufacturing process and pipeline. So that's the key for it. But then the ethos around it, which is one of the main attractions for me, is about that open and honest approach. We want to learn from each other, and we want to kind of make sure that each site that's delivered under Building Better is better and better. We want to be kind of leading best practice in MMC. So what we're doing at the moment is getting the procurement consortium going, which will do what it says on the tin. We haven't yet decided whether that will be kind of full off-site construction or some other form of MMC like SIPs. It's more likely to be the off-site, but we'll see where we end up. But then the second strand of it is something that really excites me, and that's about standardization. So we did a piece of work looking at housing association ERs, and there was about an 80% overlap, which won't surprise many of you. But what that says to me is actually we should be able to agree on a standard house type that we can go and procure at, again, helping us to get better value, but also kind of pulling best practice from each other's designs, and also thinking about the new challenges we face about kind of future office space, that access to private outdoor space, all of that. And the third piece is about data. We want to make sure we're collecting data from these new homes so that we can influence whole life costings and business plans, but also talk to the lenders market about actually how these homes are performing in situ. So for me, MMC is key in responding to the challenges we faced pre-COVID and the new challenges we now face as a result. And really, the best way for us to respond as a sector is to work collectively and collaboratively. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. So we've now got time for some of your questions. They've been coming in thick and fast, so I'm just going to run through and take a selection for each of our speakers. John, if I start with you from a Homes England perspective, actually just a very quick preliminary question perhaps, there's a point of clarification on what forms of MMC the agency is currently promoting in terms of the MMC definition framework. So does it include category 2 panelised systems, or is it just category 1 volumetric modular? So are you able just to clarify the position on that from a Homes England perspective?
Yeah, so no, we currently take a pretty broad approach. So we're certainly not into only category 1. We do look at a whole range of products and the way that they are built and then delivered to site, because we're conscious that the sector's learning all the time as well. So right now, we certain instances, we will apply specific, say, restrictions or parameters, but that's for very specific instances. But as an agency, we're taking a broad approach to the whole sector.
Okay, thank you. And just a broader question, actually, in terms of Homes England and policy moving forward, probably linked to what the government want to do in terms of MMC, is did you see a change perhaps in how you use land and how you use your investment programs in the period ahead when it comes to MMC? So, what might DPP4 look like? What might a revised AHP look like? Have you got any sense of how that may better promote or incentivize MMC?
It's quite difficult to give you a firm view on that, and you'll have heard the Minister's comments. I think the fact that as an agency, it is one of our 6 key strategic objectives of defined in the strategic plan, the fact that we have got a dedicated directors working group in terms of MMC, that we have that relationship with the Ministry, it's very much in our thinking right now. But obviously, with all things, it's part of wider governmental conversations. So what that comes out and looks like as we move through COVID, I can't comment on, but it is very much part of the main conversation.
Yeah, thank you, John. Will, one for you, and it may again link to one of the questions asked to the Minister, actually. So from a NatFed perspective, what's the ask of government, and in turn probably Homes England, in terms of what you're sensing registered providers, housing associations need, so that actually MMC can be fully embraced and become part of the solution, rather than perhaps in the past where it's maybe been a problem or there's legacy issues in terms of how it's being perceived?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think our sense is that housing associations, our members, are very keen to embrace MMC, and many are doing so. And where there are challenges, it's around the uncertainty, the kind of broader uncertainty around investment in delivery more widely. So our sense is that if people knew that they had kind of long-term funding at rates that allowed people to keep building affordable housing, then investment in MMC kind of would happen much more easily. And certainly there would be other barriers to overcome, and things like building better are fantastic examples of work that can help unlock some of the kind of practical issues. But that at the core of it is that need for some long-term policy certainty around affordable house building. So I think our key ask around this, both before this crisis, but also as we now, is around that certainty of affordable housing funding and support with government over the next few years, which will give housing associations the confidence to make that investment.
Thank you, Will. Neil, sort of a technical question, I suppose, but one worth you clarifying. Someone's asked about the land constraints that might prevent a modular solution being applicable, in particular things like having a sloping site or the like. Is there any sort of guidance as to when MMC, or certainly category 1 modular MMC, is not the right solution, or conversely how it can be made to work?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So naturally, the simplest site for MMC is a nice flat one with easy access, all those sorts of things. But in reality, we know that happens very infrequently. If you look at the site that we are building as master developer ourselves in Kitchener, and one that Mark and Cast are involved with, it's like a test bed for the MMC, and a site that Top Hat bought some years ago, well before my involvement. But that's on quite a gradient. There's a real slope there. So you can find solutions for this. You don't necessarily need any different foundations other than what you might provide for a traditional home. Of course, it's much cheaper if you've got a simpler, more cost-effective foundation solution, but there are ways around it. So I think that the constraints that I've found in my 3 months are really around sites that already have a planning permission. And often I'm sent schemes and told by the client that the architect is MMC friendly and understands this, and we look at it and think, well, okay, well, there's other things they could do to help us. So it's more around design than I would say land constraints.
Thank you, Neil. Alison, so someone's picked up here on the importance of using innovative materials and systems, particularly those that enable us to get closer to net zero and climate change, things like CLT. Is there a sort of building better view from the assembled housing associations as to what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something we've been talking about as a lot, a group as a lot, because prior to the government announcement, we were already starting to think about how net zero carbon should be incorporated into the design. So absolutely, the members around the table have said we want to make sure we've got a provider who can offer us a building regs compliant approach, but also for providers who net zero carbon is key, making sure that we can offer that as well. And as Neil said, there are a number of providers, including Top Hat, out there who already have those standard designs that we can get involved with and kind of buy off the shelf from them.
Yep, very good. Just perhaps one final question. I'll open it for anyone to answer, but it's a really important one in my view. Does the panel have any further guidance in terms of collaborative or smart procurement models? So one of the things that I think is often coming up is the need to think differently about procurement, that interface between the client world and the manufacturing contracting world. Who wants to maybe open up with a view on what the future procurement needs to look like? Alison, you've volunteered, I think, for that one.
Yeah, I'd say come if you're a housing association or a local authority, come and talk to us at Building Better, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. From a personal perspective at Raven, when we started the conversation about delivering some sites through off-site construction, I felt like I was having a wedding rather than a party. Everybody wanted to charge me double to give me advice. Come and talk to Building Better, because we've all been through that process, and we're trying to make it as easy and as streamlined as possible for people to procure off-site construction.
Neil, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So I think that, as I mentioned, we're working with lots of different people, and the procurement routes are clearly different from public procurement down to private, and bilateral agreements are much simpler to do. But I think it's back to the education piece I spoke to in my brief talk, because the reality is that early involvement requires a much earlier set of checks and balances from your QS and your project managers in those early stages. You've got to get those signed off much simpler and earlier, because the reality is, to use this particular system, you've got to be some way down the road. You've got to have terms agreed at that point that you make that commitment to go into planning. So again, early conversations, early discussions, and if we can help with the educational piece to decision makers, then I'm happy to do that.
Brilliant, thank you, Neil. I think we're probably coming to the end in terms of the allocated time slot. So let me just give you my takeaways and what I've heard over the last hour or so. So starting with the Minister, I think what we heard was a very clear ambition to want to embrace MMC as part of the post-COVID housing recovery. Obviously, the detail is not there yet in terms of what that looks like in relation to emerging policy. There's clearly also some discussions to be had with Treasury in terms of how any of that might get funded and implemented. So it's early days, but I think we certainly got a very positive and powerful signal that the government really recognised the role of MMC. From John, we got a very clear picture of how Homes England are really trying to embrace MMC to appropriately incentivise it and embed it into the mainstream housing market. Some of that reflected in the numbers that he shared, going from 2,000 MMC related homes per annum to 15,000 in this last year. So that in itself shows you the progress being made. He talked about Northstowe in Cambridge being one of the exemplar schemes going forward as well, which I think is going to be really important. From a NatFed perspective, we heard Will talk about that need for really the unlock, if you like, for MMC is going to be completely and inextricably linked to long-term planning and investment. The need to think long-term through development investment programs to drive MMC and to drive better quality homes, decarbonise homes, etc. From Neil, we heard a really important point about smashing this stigma that modular equals design poverty. So standardization does not have to mean lack of choice. I think a really important point there. Design-led approach to modular, the ability to very easily deliver to zero carbon as well. I think that's a really important point, particularly in the context of 2050 net zero carbon commitments that this country has made. But really, for me, one of the key things from Neil's talk was about early involvement, and it links to the sort of procurement piece we just spoke about there. The need to embrace early engagement with manufacturers so that you have a design that is thinking about manufacture from the earliest possible stage and embracing those 5 benefits. He spoke about speed, quality, performance and energy performance, certainty of delivery, and then the mortgageability, chargeability and the warranty position. And then from Alison, we heard about the great work that Building Better have been doing now for 18 months, 2 years, the importance of collaboration amongst housing associations. So bringing a set of housing associations together to effectively combine to achieve borrowed scale, if you like, to aggregate their demand, to have a much more joined up conversation with the MMC sector. I think it's really important. The ability to start thinking about standardizing the employees' requirements and what clients are asking for, collecting data so we can again demystify some of what is actually achievable in terms of MMC delivery. So those were the takeaways for me. Hopefully that hour session has been of use to you all, has answered some of your queries. I'm conscious we weren't able to go through all of the questions, but we will share those and look at those as a selection of what's on your mind. From a perspective of the webinar, please do give feedback. I think on the screen at the moment you'll see a rating screen in terms of giving some feedback on what you've heard. Thank you to all of our presenters for participating and giving their time. Thank you to Top Hat for sponsoring, and obviously for Building Better for organising all of this. We will be distributing a video of this session through a separate email that will come after the event. So thank you all and goodbye.